Dinner Conversations is brought to you by Food for the Hungry, a relief and development organization serving those in need around the globe for more than 40 years.
Help our friends at Food for the Hungry save thousands of refugee lives today by considering a generous gift.
A gift that will be matched 22 times.
It's incredible. Visit fh.org/dinner to give now.
I was performing at the Cove a while back, and at lunch, Will Graham, Billy Graham's grandson, came to eat with me. And I was wondering, well, I wonder what he's going to be like. And I'd heard my mother say she taught him at Liberty, and she adored him. He sat down at the table and started talking. I mean, I didn't have to hardly ask a question. He was off telling the most incredible stories about his grandparents, Billy Graham and Ruth Graham. And on today's episode, he is going to be telling us all the secrets of Billy Graham. No, actually, he really is.
Yeah.
But they're not bad. They humanize him. And I asked him when I heard these stories at the Cove, I said, please come on Dinner Conversations and share with people like me who think your grandfather was the fourth in the Godhead.
Sure, yeah.
To realize he's a freak just like the rest of us and that we all need a Savior. And Billy Graham was always pointing to Jesus. But our tendency is to fall in love with the messenger instead of the message.
Yeah, we tend to idolize, and I love how Will dispels that. He loves talking about the human nature.
And he loved his grandparents.
Yes, completely respectful. And then we got the double honor of getting to have Billy and Ruth's oldest daughter, Gigi Graham.
Not oldest, the daughter they love the longest.
Don't you love that?
That's how she says
I
it.
know. And she is spunky, and y'all's conversation is a part of this bigger conversation in Billy and Ruth's first home in Montreat, North Carolina.
No one gets to go inside.
That's right. We are on the road, and we are hitting it in some great conversations with Will Graham and Gigi Graham.
And there's one seat left at the table, and it's yours. Let's join the conversation. What grandchild are you? What number are you?
I think I'm about dead center. There's 19 of us.
Okay.
So there's half of them in front of me and half of them behind me. So.
And last time I was here at the Cove, the only time I've been to the Cove, I think. But anyway, I enjoyed it. It was first time as a solo artist.
Well, let's say I think with the Gaithers.
Yeah. But the best part of that weekend was lunch with you, and I've told everybody that because I didn't know what to expect. You know, I'd seen your father, I'd seen
Franklin,
but the sister Anne, you know, they're very, you know, I mean, they're very
formal.
Yeah, I don't know, dignified. Yeah, and then you sit down at the table and open up about my mother teaching you, which immediately we connected there because I love my mother and you obviously did, and she liked you a lot.
She loved me a lot.
But didn't like your wife, you said.
Well, girlfriend at the time, but didn't like her. But my wife, Kendra, didn't. She skipped half her classes, so she didn't deserve to be loved. That's for sure.
I like that. Coming from the past, deserve to be loved.
The thing that I remember most and I love so much was you started telling stories about your wonderful grandmother and your wonderful grandfather. And I got to meet your grandmother once when I was performing here, and she invited me up for a Coke float on April Fool's Day, and it took them a long time to convince me that it wasn't a joke because it was April 1st, and you know. But I went up and had a wonderful time with her. I remember at that time asking everybody I knew, every evangelist, and so I had to ask her, I was going through this whole thing, I don't know if you've ever been through it, but the whole question of could Jesus have sinned? Not did he, but could he have? And of course, Beverly, my mom, said, it'd be like Satan tempting me, Mark, with a beer. He's tempting me, but I'm not tempted. And I thought, well, what good is that?
It's not temptation.
Who needs that?
Yeah.
Your grace for something you're not even tempted with? And your mother said, well, I think so. I think he might, and I've come to the conclusion that obviously he could have sinned, or what is this? Yeah, I mean,
But that he chose not to sin.
that he just didn't. Yeah, he chose not to.
Therefore, he could identify with us.
Right.
An example.
So it was a wonderful experience, but then you started telling me stories that I'm so glad you shared with me about your grandfather, and that he was as human as the rest of us. And he wasn't, he didn't mess up like a lot of those preachers do, but he was a hypochondriac. That was thrilling to me to learn.
That he had flaws.
Yeah,
Yes.
He was, let's just say he kept the Mayo Clinic in business. I don't know. My grandmother and him were exact opposite in this. My grandmother being on the mission field, she knew what hard life was. And she never complained, and she really had a lot of pain.
Yeah.
She had a deteriorating back problem, and where late in life she was always having to have morphine patches to help take care of the pain. She was always in pain, and I would see her from time to time wince, and then she would just go on smiling.
That was the extent of.
Yeah, I mean, she was in pain, but she's sitting there, she'll sit there and talk, and no matter how much pain she's in, she wouldn't let you know. And one thing that helped my grandmother was that on her wall in her bedroom, she had a whole bunch of pictures of family, but in the middle of it was a crown of Jerusalem thorns. And my grandmother said she would never complain, because if her God could go through that, point to the crown, then she's got nothing to whine about.
And did Billy ever hear her say this?
Yeah, but he made up for it. So he was the one
Closed the gap.
he closed the averages.
Did anyone ever say, you might be a hypochondriac?
No, well, I'm not sure if we ever used that term, but my grandmother, she would always correct him, she would kind of rebuke him, Billy, just stop complaining, and you've heard the story before, die like a Christian. In other words, don't
shut up and die like a Christian.
Well, everyone's going to die one day.
Story. That's one of my favorite stories you told.
Well, I'm not sure if I know all the details. You may have to ask Gigi.
I'll tell you what. We could have
to get the truth.
Okay, all right, yeah, because she already said you're going to be lying.
On the side, I can't wait. Gigi, we'll come back.
So David Bruce is my granddad's assistant, one of the most loyal men you'll ever meet, one of the greatest men you'll ever meet, and he's a tremendous pastor. But he's been my granddaddy's right-hand man, been his personal assistant, and taking care of his finances, everything for my granddaddy. One of the most well-liked people, and he's got the toughest job, because he answers to my granddaddy, answers to my dad, and then all the other siblings as well, and all the grandkids. So he gets shot from all directions.
Oh my!
So he's got one of the toughest jobs, but he does it with a smile on his face, and we all love him. And he really did have one of the toughest jobs. So he used to set up my granddad's crusades. And David Bruce was with my granddaddy one day, and I think they had gone for a swim or something like that. My granddad, he said, I want to go for a swim. Can I go for a swim? We're like, well, yeah, okay, we'll take you for a swim. So he'll go down to the hotel, swim, and went back, and they were going in and said, David, I need you to make a phone call to Ruth. And David's like, yes, sir. Yes, boss. Right away he starts getting the phone. And what do you want me to tell her? And so he's starting to dial the phone number. He says, tell her I'm dying. And he hangs up the phone real quick. What do you mean you're dying? Do I need to call 911? No, call Ruth. Tell her I'm dying. Well, call her right now. He's in this tough place. Like, seriously? I don't call 911.
I need to take care of you.
Yeah, I got.
Right.
So he's calling, looking at him. No, call her right now. Okay. So he gets on the phone, and she answers the phone. Hello, and he goes, Miss Cram, this is David. Oh, hey, David, how's things going? Well, I think things are okay. And my granddad's like, emotion, like, tell her. He's like, Dr. Graham wants me to give you a message. Okay, what's that? And, and my granddad's like, tell her. He says he's dying. And she just breaks out in total laughter. He's been saying that for the last 30 years. Tell him to hurry up. She would always put things in perspective. Yeah. And so she was the one that kept my granddaddy straight and level.
Did he ever say, no, I'm serious?
Well, probably the day he died, he probably said that. I told you I was sick. I was sick.
Yeah, I told you I was sick.
But he, The funny thing is, he outlived everybody.
Yeah.
That's the one that thought he was going to die first.
Yeah.
And we actually worked on his funeral for over 25 years. We worked on his funeral,
Wow.
because we really thought he would die first. And
Right.
my grandmother would die first, and he's got 3 siblings. 2 of them would die. All his team would die. I'm talking about like Bev Shea.
Right, Bev Shea.
and Cliff.
You think about someone who offered so much assurance to people still having what might be a rational fear. I mean, that's the cool human side of someone who offers
Did
all
he
this.
fear anything?
Well,
If you're dying,
I think it was he knew where he was going. I think it was the
right.
process of dying,
The physical,
the
right.
physical.
That's what I worry about.
Like, is it going to be drowning?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll probably go down in a plane but survive that, then it'll catch on fire, then I'll survive that, then finally I'll be in a raft and I'll survive that and I'll drown.
Yeah, that's right. Shark
I'll
gets
a
you,
little bit of
shark
all
bait.
of it. Dinner Conversations is brought to you by Food for the Hungry, a relief and development organization serving those in need around the globe for more than 40 years. And right now, Food for the Hungry is helping hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh.
Nearly 1 million refugees fled from their home in Myanmar to escape violent persecution. Refugees like Nihab, who crossed the border with her husband and 6 children. While safe from violence, refugee camp conditions are horrific, and Nihab's children are always at risk of diseases, many of them deadly.
Food for the Hungry is providing medical care and treated Nihab's 3-month-old baby who fell ill with pneumonia. There are thousands more like Nihab who need our help.
You can join Food for the Hungry and us in providing life-saving treatment by donating today. Even better, your gift will be matched 22 times when you give at fh.org/dinner.
So $25 becomes $550, $50 becomes $1,100, and so on. Countless families urgently need our help. Donate to Food for the Hungry today, and your generous gift will literally help save lives.
It's an incredible opportunity we have, and I think of Jesus' own words in Matthew 25 when he says, "What you have done to the least of these, you have done unto me." So give today at fh.org/dinner.
And don't forget, not only will your gift be matched 22 times, but for every dollar you donate, we will enter you into a drawing for our Season 2 Grand Prize Giveaway. And
what is the giveaway?
It's dinner with me and Andrew in Houston, Texas at my favorite restaurant.
And right after dinner, we're coming back to Mark's house to be a guest on Mondays with Mark live broadcast.
And your travel and accommodations are included. We also have a VIP package for everyone who gives $1,000 or more.
Which includes some signed CDs, DVDs, and books from Mark and me, and also a stack of books and music from some of our Season 2 guests, including Kathy Lee Gifford, Danny Goki, Amy Grant, and the most special part is a handwritten...
Oh yes, I'm gonna write your favorite line, whatever it is, from Mary Did You Know, and you'll get that one, like when she kissed her little baby, she kissed the face of God. That's probably my favorite. And then I'll autograph that and send that to you, and you can keep that, and then when I'm dead, it'll be worth $2 or $3.
So remember to give now, give generously at fh.org/dinner. Every dollar is an entry into our Season 2 Grand Prize giveaway.
Here I am sitting in the home of Billy and Ruth Graham, and I am with the child of the Grahams that they love the longest.
Thank you for saying that, not the oldest and the eldest. That makes me feel much better.
And from what I hear from my good buddy Phil Waldrop, y'all are good friends, and he
Yes.
says that you are a riot.
Oh,
and
well.
I am attracted always to
The people that cause
Aren't
trouble,
you?
cause trouble.
No, not trouble, but
we
know
stir
how
things
to,
up.
Yeah, know how to
Yeah. We stir things
have
up.
a good time. I mean, they have the best stories.
That's
So
right.
you were born in
My mother was that way. Believe me.
that's what I've heard.
Oh, yeah.
And then I got to meet her that one day. We had a Coke float together. That was a thrill.
That's the way she would get out of doing exercise. She'd have the nurses bring Coke floats when the therapist would come up.
Oh, really?
And they'd sit and do Coke floats for 1 hour, and she'd say, "Okay, that's my hour."
How did her back? I mean, for the last 25 years of her life, Will told me last time I was here, she was in like a death sentence of pain.
She was always in pain.
As long as you knew her?
I have her back. We have the same doctor, and he says I just have her back. It's just deterioration.
Hereditary?
Deterioration.
Yeah.
Arthritis, and also she had, there's a famous story of her falling out of the tree in my yard when my kids were little. That helped. I'm sure it messed things up.
Oh.
It cracked her. She had a crack here, and she had a crack in her heel, and it was a pretty hard fall.
Yeah.
So.
And she never complained?
Never.
How would you even know she, was in pain?
You could look in her eyes.
Yeah.
And of course she took some pain medicine, but we'd look in her eyes. Mom, you hurt, don't you? No, I'm fine. Mother, you hurt. No, I'm fine. Mother, come on, how are you? What's the matter? Tell me. I don't like organ recitals. So she just wouldn't tell us.
What? I don't
Organs. She's not going to tell us about her organs.
Oh!
She doesn't like organ recitals.
So your dad?
He was the opposite.
Okay.
Any little tiny thing that was wrong with him was going to be the end.
Now, was he really sick?
Sometimes he did have some very peculiar things happen. And we would, like a spider bite or something that got, that was in the news. Or when he got a bug called the Pseudomonas bug, and nobody knew what it was until he stopped in Hawaii on his way to the Orient, and an Oriental doctor in Hawaii found out what it was. So he would have, he did have some things wrong.
Some odd things.
But he any little tiny thing, that was going to.
He was always dying?
In fact, one time when he came back from a trip, Mother had made for him, one of the staff make for him a gigantic black tombstone and put it, and we have a graveyard on the property. And she had it put in the graveyard and took him down there to see it, and it had his name in it. He was not a bit. He didn't think this was funny. He wasn't impressed. He was upset. He did not think it was funny. But
Did she have an inscription on it?
Oh, yeah,
yet?
she was a character.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
She was fun.
So tell me about, now, your grandparents lived here across the street, and they helped your parents, Billy and Ruth, buy this home. Is that correct?
Well, they don't know if they helped them, but it's right across the street. This was just a little sort of summer cottage that needed a lot of work, but it was on 2 lots and had a stream, and the main thing was it was right across the street from my parents, grandparents. And so I think I've got the numbers right. I've got papers somewhere, but I think they paid about $4,000 for this house and thought they were really overextending.
Wow.
Of course, they'd remodeled over the years, little by little.
And your mother knew that his life was going to be on the road a lot and wanted to be near her parents,
That's
correct?
true. When he started with Youth for Christ, they were living outside of Chicago. And then Daddy asked Mother, said, if I'm going to be traveling as much, where would you like to live?
Oh.
Which was very gracious of him.
Yeah.
And she said, well, if you're going to travel, I'd like to live closer to my parents. Now, Daddy would have chosen the beach. He would have chosen Florida or California.
Really?
If it was up to him.
Okay.
Sunshine.
Yeah.
But he was gracious, and he loved the mountains, but he just loved the beach.
So tell me a funny story about your mom.
Oh, my mother was a character. Oh, she was a character. She was extremely creative. She was an intellectual. Yeah. She was a reader. She was a writer, an artist. But she was spunky. Oh, my goodness, she was spunky.
Yeah.
And she used to tell us girls, there comes a time to quit submitting and start outwitting. So she did a lot.
Explain that. Submitting and start outwitting.
In other words, all that time about submitting to your husband and submitting and all this. Now she said there comes a time that you quit submitting and you start outwitting. And so she did a lot of that.
I love that. And so, boy, that would be.
In fact, when I would tell Daddy years later when he was older, and I'd tell him a story about Mother, and I'd say that's what she said. He said, "She did a lot of that, didn't she, honey?" Yes, she did. For example, here we have a fireplace, okay, and she loved fireplaces. Mother loved fireplaces. I think Daddy couldn't care less if there was a fireplace.
Right.
If you go to the home there in Charlotte and look at my grandmother's fireplace, there's no soot in it, okay? I don't know if they ever had a fire in it. But here we had a fire going all the time.
Yeah.
But I think it's because in China growing up, they would gather around a little coal stove in the evening, and the men would read and the women did handwork.
Oh.
And that to her, that was home, that was security, that was love, that was all the things that meant, that to her. So she loved, in fact, when she traveled with Daddy, she had a little candle she'd take with her. So in the hotel room, she could just light that. That was meant something
Isn't
to her.
that something?
But now Daddy didn't care because he got up, 4:30 in the morning or whatever it was to milk all the cows, and so they went to bed very early.
Right.
They didn't sit around a fireplace and play games or read.
Sure.
So anyway, Mother had this fireplace here, and that was fine. But then when we moved, we had to move, and things got a little hectic with the tourists here.
Uh-huh.
So we moved, and Mother, when she was building the house up there, she told Daddy she wanted more than one fireplace. Well, Daddy finally, reluctantly, I think, agreed to 2. Mm-hmm. Well, Mother wanted more than 2 fireplaces. Mm-hmm. So Daddy left and went to India for several weeks. I think it was 5 or 6 weeks, maybe longer. She turned to the builder and she said, I want you to build fireplaces faster than you've ever built them in your life. And she got 5 before he came home. That's what she means by outwitting.
Oh, yeah.
For all practical purposes, I mean, she was a single parent. Obviously, she had her parents across the street. But Daddy was gone. When I was growing up, it was over 60% of the time. So that's a lot. Now, that is not maybe unusual today because we have military and we have, business people that travel a lot. But in those days, fathers weren't gone from home. And so that was unusual. But Mother, she used that instead of complaining. She never, ever, ever complained. Daddy would leave and I'd see tears in her eyes and tears in his eyes. And then she would turn to us and she would quote the old mountain man that said, make the least of all that goes and the most of all that comes. And she'd say, come on, kids. Isn't that great?
Yes.
And she'd say, kids, let's go and get ready for Daddy and look forward to his coming back again.
Oh, my God.
So that's the way she would, always positive.
Why would his life have been different had he not met her?
I don't even want to think about it.
Wow.
That
was a God thing,
it would have been
wasn't
very,
it?
very different. In fact, the girl that he was engaged to before Mother.
Oh, we don't know about that.
Yeah. Well, you can read about her, Emily. There's no secret. Her son lives here in town. We can get him to come talk to us. Anyway, he's a friend. In fact, the first time he met me, he said, to think, Gigi, I could have been you.
Oh.
But anyway, they were very much in love. It was definitely a love relationship. So when Daddy left to go away, it was hard on her. And in those days, obviously, she was alone at night. She would go visit my grandparents across the street some. But, there was no television or very little. Daddy's favorite program was Gunsmoke, so that only came on once a week. So, we didn't have a whole lot of TV. She read and she wrote and she was creative. She was lonely. I mean, she'd put us in bed at night. There was no Facebook. There was no, telephones, very little telephone. Our telephone was over there on the wall. I think our number was 4, if I'm not mistaken.
Serious?
And it's in those days,
Are you
those
serious?
kind. In fact, the telephone operator was our babysitter because Mother would call her up and say, Sue, I'm going over to my parents. Now, if my babies cry, let me know. Then she'd hang the receiver over our crib. So
You are kidding.
this was a little town.
That is amazing.
It was fun. Anyway, but she was lonely at night. You can imagine. And she would take my daddy's jacket and sometimes sleep with it, just so she could have his smell there.
Wow.
And so it was hard on her, but she never complained, never. But she turned all that into creative energy. She was very creative. She knew the Bible a lot better than Daddy did. She was a student of the Bible. She was a real intellectual. I mean, she loved reading that type of book. And she also painted. She was an artist. Very creative when it came to decorating or making the least of what she had. They didn't have money back then, so she had to make a lot of things. She learned that in China, and so she was just a very unusual person.
I love hearing you call him Granddaddy because to me it's like I think about how I observe this man in our history as the most prominent pastor, at least in the 20th century, and then maybe one of the most prominent figures, at least out of American soil in the 20th century. And you just call him Granddaddy. I mean, did you know the weight of his influence growing up, or was he just Granddad?
First time I realized it was probably in kindergarten, so 1980. I remember my teacher came up, my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Burns. She's still alive. And she came up, put her hands on my shoulder and said, this is Dr. Billy Graham's grandson. And I'm thinking, how in the world does she know who my granddaddy is? And for us as grandchildren, we called him Daddy Bill.
Okay.
That was our name of affection for him. My grandmother we called Tete, and that's a Chinese word, a bad pronounced Chinese word because Americans can't pronounce Chinese words, but it means old lady in Chinese, where she grew up. It was a Tete. Tete is the way they would say it in Chinese, but we call her Tete, which meant old lady, which we think, man, that's disrespectful.
That's what she wanted.
But in China, old age is revered and honored. And so, trust me, we don't know Chinese.
Yeah.
So she had to give us that name. So we, as grandchildren, called her Tete, or we shortened it to Teddy sometimes, but we called him Daddy Bill. So those are the ways that we referred to them. But and they were always grandparents. But it probably wasn't more until I was at Liberty University when I started to realize the weight of what my granddaddy had done. And because I went to a public high school in Boone, one high school. I went to it. No one cared who your granddaddy was. They knew who he was. And but most of them, did you score any goals in the soccer game? Did you get the latest Nintendo game, or vice versa? They, which girl are you dating? Or that's what they cared about. They didn't care about your granddad.
Yeah.
So
Crusades with hundreds of thousands of people.
That's right. They didn't care about that. But at the same, so I had a very normal experience in a sense growing up. I knew my granddaddy was different, but it wasn't until Liberty when I got around other Christians, a lot of Christians, that I started to feel the weight of it when I was at Liberty University, which was starting in '93, which is a tremendous experience. Got to meet your mom there at my freshman year. And so we had some, and I ended up meeting my wife there. I'm indebted to Liberty University, how it taught me God's Word. And my granddaddy would even come do my graduation.
Yeah.
I think that was the last graduation he did.
Wow.
He just got there was a lot of pressure on him and stuff like that.
But
And
that must have made you proud in another way. I mean, because your grandfather came. I mean,
Yeah.
how cool is that?
Not just Dr. Billy Graham, but
Yeah.
It was
granddad.
so Dr. Falwell allowed him to hand me my degree. So my granddaddy handed me my degree. He made all his grandchildren feel like they're the most important. Both my grandmother and grandfather. Sometimes I say one or the other, but both of them always made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. You're the most favorite grandchild. So we all believe that, all 19 of us believe, no, I'm the favorite. No, I'm the favorite.
Isn't that great?
But we all felt that.
Yeah.
And so they loved us each
Did they ever say
individually.
it?
No. They said, we sure do love you. I'm proud of you. They would always say that. And I'm so
See, I
grateful
tell
for
my
that.
niece and nephews, every one of them, they're my
Favorite?
favorite, but I whisper it in their ear. And I want them to kind of hate the others.
See, my mom says it. My mom says it, but she says it out loud. And that's why I was like, Mom.
Yeah.
I was like,
Your mom does?
yeah, but she says it to my siblings. So,
Oh, yeah.
You're my favorite. I love you too, Will.
Yeah, exactly.
I love you too. Mom,
That's
do
funny.
you have favorites? No, I don't have favorites.
How do you think you're different from your father?
I think one of the great things I had an opportunity to do was become a pastor. I think that's one big difference that my dad and I do have.
Like in a local church
In a local
setting.
church. I was a pastor of a local church. My grandfather was a pastor of a local church for 14 months. So he could only last 14 months.
He was like a
So if you're a pastor and you lasted more than 14 months, you just did something Billy Graham could never do.
That's right.
And but having that pastor experience, and I went to do it for 6 months. I was going to be a pastoral intern for 6 months, and that's all I signed and agreed to do. 8 years later, I was still there.
Yeah.
And I ended up. And I
Were
loved
you
it.
ready to go after 8 years?
No, I went with tears.
You did?
Did you feel that calling? I mean, did that calling come in Liberty? Or, I think, did you ever feel pressure to be like the perfect Christian kid or called to the pastorate? Or?
No, I was never. Was I called in life? Yes. And I got that calling earlier in life. And I look back and I see a dotted trail. I can't just say, boop, here's the date. But I look back and I see a dotted trail. Because I remember the teacher said back in 82 or something like that, 83, draw a picture of what you want to be in life. Mm-hmm. So I drew, everybody was drawing like Joe Montana helmets, 49er helmets, and Miami Dolphins for Dan Marino, all these type of helmets. Because they all want to be a quarterback, every kid wants to be a quarterback and win the Super Bowl. But I drew 2 pictures. I drew one of an open Bible, and then the thing beside it was a pair of David Clark headsets. These are aviation headsets, and they're lime green. They're ugly looking, but they're really nice ones. And that's what my dad would use to fly around and preach. my dad, for Samaritan's Purse. And so I want to go be around. These are aviators with the headphones with the microphone.
Yeah.
And so I was wanting to fly around, tell people about Jesus. And so what's interesting is that, and I felt like that calling. So and I look back and I see all these little steps in my life, other commitment, other times that where God confirmed that calling in my life. But it wouldn't be until Liberty that I would preach my first sermon. And then by my senior year, I had my pilot's license.
Oh, wow.
So I got my pilot's license at Liberty, and I preached my first sermon, not at Liberty, but during my time at Liberty. And so both of those things came true my senior year at Liberty. So it's just neat how to see God put something on your heart back in 81, 82, and now it's 97 and coming true. So
Did your granddad ever counsel you in ways of, or pastoral things, advise?
no, everybody wants to know if that's what, we stop down or we sit down and talk shop.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
never did. When I was with him, I didn't talk much. He didn't talk much. And that's one thing people realize that my grandfather, Daddy Bill, he never talked at home. Very little.
You either? Because you talk a lot.
I know. Yeah, sorry.
But that would be more like Ruth then, right?
Well,
No?
she's.
Talk more?
I don't know. I get from my let's say I get from my mom.
Oh, really?
Yeah, okay,
my
okay.
mom.
Is that right?
It's my mom.
Yeah.
It's my mom coming out at me, and we're a mix of our parents, right? And I definitely got this from my mom, but my granddaddy wouldn't talk. So when I was with my granddaddy, we never really talked. We just hung out.
Yeah.
For a long time, when he was sitting in his bedroom, I'd just go back there and sit with him. And he said, "Well, how are things going at the Cove?" And I'd give him a little report, and then how are the kids? I'd talk to him. It was just, and we'd sit there and watch TV like his pastor, because he couldn't go to church, physically go to church. So he would just sit and watch his pastor on television, Don Wilton.
Oh, really?
Out of First Baptist Spartanburg. And so we'd be sitting up there watching and listening. And just from time to time we would talk, but.
So he liked to listen to sermons?
Oh yeah. He loved to listen to talk to other people, like other people talking. He would love to sit there and learn about, to you and your family. Tell me about your dynamics, how you grew up. Tell me about your mom, at Liberty and stuff like that. So he would always want to learn about others. That's why his favorite TV show in the world was Larry King Live.
Oh, really?
That's it, because he got to learn about everybody before he ever met them. So when he met the person in real life, he would already have, because he watched Larry King, he would know what this person
Isn't that
interested in.
Researcher on those, yeah.
So he loved Larry King,
Yeah.
and they had a very good relationship. My granddaddy was on there more than anybody else on Larry King.
Isn't that something?
And sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with
Every
Larry and with
time.
everybody else. But that was one of those neat things. But my granddaddy, I didn't, getting back to your question, did I ever know about my granddaddy? But it wasn't until Liberty that I started realizing. I had people like knock on my door, and I go, in the dorm room, and I go, "Hello," and they say, "Hey," and they're just like looking past my shoulder, and I'm like looking in my room like, what do you look at?
They just want
Can I help you, buddy? You're getting freaky now. This is gonna go south real quick. He said, "Well, I just want to see what Billy Graham's grandson room looks like."
Wow.
I was like, "Seriously?"
That started to register.
And I'm like, dude, it's just like your dorm room. All our dorm rooms they're ugly, all right? Mine's ugly, yours is ugly, all right?
Have you found it opened any doors for you?
Oh, it opens tons of doors. And that's why I'm grateful. Being Billy Graham's grandson, it's got its curses and blessings.
Right.
One is, the curse is that everyone has an expectation, one, what you look like, or what you're going to wear.
Sure.
Yeah.
How are you going to act? But the good things is that it opens tons of doors. People will do things for me because they love my granddaddy. So I get to experience things, the benevolence of people, because of the love they have for my granddaddy. And so I'm very grateful for that. And trust me, the blessings far outweigh of any of the curses I had in life from it.
Well, I listened to you talk about being a preacher, and now, that's what I would consider being outside of the local church, but working on crusades, much like your grandfather did. And I read this where you said, we don't do massive evangelism, we do one-on-one evangelism on a massive scale. And I want to ask about that evangelism question, because evangelism carries a certain connotation that I don't know that it did in your grandfather's era of crusading, of kind of like maybe browbeating with the Bible or some legalistic things. But you still believe in this evangelism style, or
Proclamation evangelism, we'll call it.
okay.
And that's what I still believe in it. And because the Bible teaches that. It says faith comes by hearing and hearing the Word of God. And so I believe in telling people about Jesus Christ. One thing I am adamant against is lifestyle evangelism.
Okay.
And
What is that? How do you define that?
People define lifestyle evangelism as they're not going to use words, they're just going to let their lifestyle evangelize people.
Okay.
Which is...
So actions and...
Yeah, they say actions are better than words. The Bible says the opposite. Faith comes by hearing the Word of God. So the most important thing you can do is tell people about Jesus. Now, granted, please don't misunderstand me. Your life is important on how you live out that message.
Sure, backs it up.
Yeah, it backs it up. But it's not the other way around. Because listen, you guys and me will never live a good enough life to lead anybody to Christ. We don't live. There's only one person that
I'm
lives
real
good
good
enough.
at doing the opposite.
Well, we all are, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to tell people about Christ.
Yeah.
That's why Jesus said faith comes by hearing. Hearing. They got to hear it.
And haven't you found that the older you get, the more in love you fall? And that was odd when I was younger to say you're falling in love with the Lord, right? But let me start over.
Yeah, that won't get me a drink.
Okay, good.
a tea, that is,
I'll take a
guys.
bite.
I don't even remember where I was going.
Just falling
Thank
in with
you,
Jesus.
Jesus.
Oh, falling in love with the Lord. The older I get, that old song, He gets sweeter as the days go by. Man, it's true. I mean, the more I get to know the Lord, the kinder, and it's easier to talk to people about Him because He really is worth getting to know.
Yeah.
You know? It's not like if you were to die today, do you know where you'd spend eternity? Man, I don't start there anymore. I start with, hey, where are you from? How'd you come to your conclusions?
Yeah.
You know, rather than, I used to just see flame licking at everybody's butt all the time. And if I didn't win them to Jesus on this flight, their blood would be on my hands.
Your
You don't think
responsibility.
that, do you?
No. People are responsible for their own actions.
Right.
But
do you witness to every person you see?
I try to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it's quick. Like I didn't get it all in. I just took a long flight up to Alaska to go see my dad just a few weeks ago. So I sat down there. I was going to start talking to the guy. And I found out he is a believer. And he goes, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a preacher. And
That opened doors.
And,
that opened conversation.
Well, it is, and you know what? I've never had one person make it a negative.
Oh, yeah.
They're like, really,
Interesting.
you are?
Interesting.
I had one lady on the plane. She started crying,
Oh.
and she said, I don't know what was going on in her life. I think she was on that plane to go make a bad decision, and she said, I've been praying that God would send somebody, and lo and behold, a preacher sits beside me, and you're talking to me. And she just started weeping. Wow. She just started crying. I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
And she goes, God, you were an answer to my prayer because I was praying for God to send me something before I did something. And so I have no idea what it was.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because, some people say, I never tell people I'm a preacher. Like I've heard preachers say, I never tell people one guy said, I'm a manufacturer representative. In other words, God manufactures and he's a representative.
Got it.
That's what he says.
tricky.
And I say, no, I'm the opposite.
Yeah.
I tell people I'm a preacher.
Well, it'll either open the doors or shut them down.
It's always
quick.
open doors. And
For you, it's
it always
Yeah.
has. I had one guy who was a big rap star sitting
But
on the
you're
plane beside
very
me. and went up-
approachable. You're not a normal preacher.
Well, I'm young.
Rap star, I'm interested
I'm
in
sorry,
that.
I'm sorry.
No, no.
Well, he was just Asheville's a big music town, foodie and music town.
Yeah.
And he was in here doing a gig. And he said, what do you do? I said, I'm a preacher. Oh, man, you're a preacher, really? That's cool, man. He just wanted to know what was going on. So he and I talked. It was a short flight to Atlanta. It's only 20, 30 minutes flight. And so
That's where rappers go.
And so he goes, go to Atlanta. If you're leaving Asheville, you have to go to Atlanta. Or Charlotte. Atlanta or Charlotte is about the only way if you're going to go anywhere. But it opened up doors. So when I got off the plane, he goes, bye, preacher. Nice to talk to you, preacher. He called me preacher,
Isn't that cool?
But, it's never been a negative connotation. I think we think it causes. I got people who want to talk my ear off. And sometimes I'm like, cool, man, I've opened up a can of worms. This is going to be a long flight.
Right.
So engaging culture, like I think I'm on the older end of millennialism, right? So I was Gen Xer. It turns out I'm a dumb millennialist or whatever you call
You
it.
missed your window of
I
opportunity.
did. It was a window of opportunity. But we're in a very, I would say, in a very individualistic, kind of universalist culture, spiritually speaking, right? There's a lot of pathway to God, kind of designer. I've heard you call it the designer religion. How have you discovered, because you're in this age range, you know, I like that you said earlier, well, I am a little
I'm an
younger.
Xer.
Yeah. So how do you engage culture that's dealing in a fairly ambiguous spiritual, you know, thought process?
You know, I don't have I know that people want to say you have a big game plan, but I don't. I mean, I just go out there and I preach. What I found out, though, for the most part, when a preacher preaches, communicates, he's hitting 10 years above them and 10 years below them.
Okay.
My granddaddy, his range was a little bit wider. He had a very broad appeal. But most pastors are hitting the people. If you look at, like, if a pastor in a church, you'll see the average age of the person is the pastor's age.
So if he's
Oh,
50,
really?
the average is 50.
So that's the average 50.
See, I've cornered a dying market. I'm old. my people are old, man.
Well, they're
I love
Well,
them, though.
you're the average now.
Now,
They're
that-
the average. So, but you know, but that's what I found. That's just from personal experience. I've noticed that in any church. And that's not true, Bear. I don't want to say it's
That's
a
interesting. I've never-
die-hard rule. Just saying that's
Yeah.
the average. You'll find it around that average age. 10 years younger to 10 years
Isn't
older.
that something?
Either way, the pastor's age is right around there. Even when I was pastoring the church, I had a whole bunch of old people in there, and I had a whole bunch of young people. If you did the age, guess what? It was at my age. I didn't have anybody my age, but I had either side of it when I was pastoring a church in Raleigh. But for me, I don't have necessarily a game plan. I just go out and preach to the audience.
Keep it central.
So you don't have a 5-year plan for your life?
I have
I've never had one
I don't
either.
know why people want a 5-year
I'm
plan.
surprised I got this far. I'm serious.
You and I both.
You're surprised I got this far.
From all those stories your mom told.
How has it been to be Billy Graham's? I mean, there's got to be a lot of good and
Mark,
bad
I
with
grew
it.
up with it.
Yeah, so
So
you
in
don't
a
know
way,
any
it
different.
sort of, I didn't know anything different.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, I didn't know really, this little community here, we were so fortunate to be raised in this community, which especially at that time was made up mostly of retired missionaries and pastors from the Presbyterian Church.
Oh, cool.
And so these people had served the Lord all over the world. You know, and here we are in redneck country, mountain country, whatever you want to call it here in the mountains,
Right.
especially when I was growing up.
Right.
And yet this little cove here was an international community. So God was preparing us, even in growing up in a little international community where they all spoke. I mean, we heard, you know, Portuguese and Spanish and French and African and Chinese and Korean and Japanese spoken among the missionaries here. Because they
Wow.
would continue. The missionaries from the Presbyterian Church all had to be educated before they could go out. So these were intelligent men and women. So they kept up their interest in their country. They kept up the interest of the history, of the politics, and they would pass that on down to us, including the wonderful stories of miracles that happened. You know, to hear these stories.
Oh,
And they
that's
were
what I'd love to hear.
they were so accepting of us.
Yeah.
So as Daddy became more and more well known, they were accepting, they were protective. And you know, the thing about this little community that I always say is that the men and women I grew up around gave me an appetite for what they had. I wanted to be like them.
Isn't that great?
You know, so that, I mean, I never rebelled against being a Christian or anything.
Right.
I wanted to be like them. But I think I went off to boarding school before my 13th birthday. And in that boarding school, all of a sudden, there were pressures and expectations.
Okay.
You know, and so I think there would have been my first experience of, you know, probably sometimes negative
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, wanting you to.
They're you know, and people, you know, and the other children and grandchildren will tell you that, you know, once people know who you are or they see you come in a room, they have expectations,
Yeah, like-
and you don't know what they are.
Like you might be too spiritual to hang
Or,
out.
well, when I moved into one town in South Florida, my neighbors were scared to death because they thought that I was going to carry a big black Bible around with me and say the Bible says in
Yeah.
the community,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So they did, and they
So
found
you
out
had-
I was normal. I screamed at my kids just like everybody else did.
Isn't that great?
Let me say that I tell this to tell people at the Cove. Whenever I'm able to share, I said to them, I said, there's not one thing that any of you all could come up and tell me that would shock me, because we have a big family. Daddy had, I think, 45, 46 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
Now, when you have a big family like that, we have experienced every single thing that they could tell me
Isn't that
somewhere.
great, though?
And yet, we've experienced the grace of God.
Yes.
So that's been wonderful. But we don't have a Teflon umbrella over our family.
No, but that's what people think. You got
Oh,
some key
no,
to the
we
kingdom.
don't. Oh, my goodness. We do not have a Teflon
And the
umbrella.
best way
No,
you
no.
can tell them is you're just a freak
We're like everybody
else.
else, but God's grace is sufficient.
Yes.
That I can tell them.
My mother said to me one time, right, when you get to heaven, it's going to be amazing when you look back, the faces, right? Because I don't realize, and it's a minuscule thing compared to your father, but I think it's good that we don't know all the good that we may or may not have done. Because, first of all, I wouldn't believe it, because I know me, and I know me better than anybody knows me.
He didn't believe it either.
Yeah.
In fact, he used to say that when he got to heaven, he wasn't going to see Jesus for a long time. And we'd say, well, why, Daddy? And he would say, because. And one thing that I don't think I ever heard Daddy say, my ministry.
Oh, really?
It was always our. Because he said everybody that cleaned the carpets, drove the cars, typed the sermons, all the office work, all those that helped, in the home or wherever, they were part of helping his ministry. And so he said, it's going to take me so long to see Jesus because they're all going to be in line before me because I got the glory here and they didn't.
Wow. That's really
Daddy
profound.
was truly a humble person. I was called one time, somebody was writing a book about Daddy, and they wanted especially to have me tell about his humility. And I said, well, I can give you illustrations of his humility and stories of traveling with him and seeing his humility. But I said, that's just who he was.
Yeah.
He didn't sit down one day and say, I'm going to be humble.
Oh, or one day I'm going to be the greatest evangelist who ever lived.
And he always put other people first. I would take people up there, just like Will and the others that live here. We would at times take people up to see Daddy, especially as he was older. And we'd go into his little study there, and usually the person that was coming, the important person that was coming to visit, would have someone with him, accompanying him or her. And we'd go back there, and they'd start talking to Daddy, and it would just be within a few minutes that Daddy would say, now you back there, I want to know about you. Tell me, do you have a family? Wow. Now where are you from? He always wanted to know
Brilliant.
about the other person, and always the little people too.
Yeah.
He didn't think he was important.
You can help save thousands of lives by giving a generous gift to Food for the Hungry today.
Your gift will directly help Rohingya refugees who are currently living in dire, poverty-stricken refugee camp conditions in Bangladesh.
And get this, your gift will be matched 22 times for an exponential impact. Food for the Hungry is on the ground now, providing medical treatment to hundreds of thousands of these vulnerable children and their families.
This is the example that has been set for us by Jesus, that we would help our neighbors in their time of need. And this is what Food for the Hungry is doing to help relieve the refugee crisis in Bangladesh. So you can give today, partner with Dinner Conversations as we partner with Food for the Hungry.
Yes.
By giving generously at fh.org/dinner.
To learn more about Dinner Conversations, visit dinner-conversations.com.
And while you're there, check out our Season 1 DVD with all of our past episodes and some bonus stuff, as well as check out these cool show mugs.
Yeah. So when we have our next conversation, you can have coffee with us. Let's get back to the conversation.
I was thinking about like how your granddad had such a great relationship with Larry King, and then we were looking at the presidents, right? And thinking about all the different thought processes, even maybe belief systems in those presidents' life, and yet he was able to have this genuine, authentic relationship to some degree, all of them. And I think that comes back to what you're saying, like keeping it central. So I was reading an interview of yours, someone was interviewing you in Christianity Today, and they asked a question about, are we weak in American Christianity? Are we weakening our doctrinal commitments? And I thought it was interesting that I thought, well, could our scriptural commitments, like, are we dying on molehills of doctrinal commitments? I feel like I think about your granddad's approach to the gospel. I'm hearing what is your approach to the gospel. It's keeping the main thing the main thing.
That's right.
Do you think there's such a thing as weakening? Is that a bad thing that we're weakening doctrinal commitments for the sake of uniting over like
I have no
scriptural
idea
commitments?
what you just asked.
Well, you mean like become more centralist in our
theology and
I think it's when we keep it on focused on Jesus.
Yes.
That's the main thing. That's what my granddaddy always wanted to do. Now, my granddaddy was criticized for it. My granddaddy was really criticized for it.
like not
the right and the left?
Yeah, by both sides. Mainly the right.
Yeah.
You know, the Southern Baptists.
Yeah.
isn't that
And I'm
interesting?
Southern Baptist, Independent Baptist, like
So the
Falwell.
Southern Baptists were upset with him too?
They would do because, a number of things. One, because he would talk with Catholics.
Okay.
He would talk with Seventh-day Adventists.
Right.
He would talk with Presbyterians.
Right.
He was married to a Presbyterian. And we joke about that.
Yeah,
A lot of that stuff we joke
Yeah.
between denominations.
But there was some
with each other.
serious criticism.
But yeah,
Oh, yeah.
my granddad's hair was too long for some, especially for the independent Baptists
Yes,
like
he was.
Falwell's. I
I
mean,
remember.
Falwell didn't never criticize my granddad for his hair length or
Right.
anything, but I'm just saying there was a lot of heat came more from the right than the left. But my granddaddy, he didn't care. He wanted to focus on what was central to the gospel, and his rule was anybody who was willing to work with me to share the good news of Jesus Christ in their community is welcome at the table. So when Catholics came, they were welcome. When all these other denominations that he's not a part of, that's what he would, have.
And
as-
now everybody does that.
well,
Pretty much.
you'll still hear people that get upset.
Well, there's a fringe in every.
Yeah.
There's always that lunatic fringe out there.
When
still
my
screaming.
when my granddad went to do a peace conference and a denuclearization peace conference in Russia, he took a lot of flack from the Christian community because he saw it as you're going to badmouth the United States or going to legitimize the USSR. And my granddad wasn't going to talk bad about the United States, but he was going to go talk about the Word of God.
Right.
And so, but a lot of Christian ministers really got mad with my granddad, even to the point where he says he doesn't. When he gets home, he doesn't even know if he's going to have a ministry, because
He thought that, or
he thought
really?
that. He thought that because it had been that negative, and he was worried. I say worried. He knew it was in God's hand. That's all that mattered.
Sure.
But he was wondering what he's going to have to do when he gets
home.
back
Deal with.
to deal with, because it was he was taking so much heat. And but my granddad was just trying to open up the USSR to the gospel.
Wow.
That was a closed door for a long time. Your generation probably won't remember it as much, but I can vaguely remember it. But my parents, I mean,
that was their generation.
They had to jump under desk
Yeah.
in case of a nuclear attack, like the desk is going to help somehow. But they did those drills,
Same
and
as
so they
tornado.
remember this. And that was a big fight for my dad and his siblings' generation, was the Red Scare. And so here they are. Now my granddaddy has an opportunity to go into the communist Europe and to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ. And he was being criticized because it was communism. You don't go do anything for the communists.
Right.
They're evil. And my granddaddy was opening up the gospel. Ronald Reagan's going to get he gets a lot of credit for bringing down the Soviet Union. I think personally, I think it was my granddad.
Do you?
Because it was spiritual.
Yeah, it
was a
was.
spiritual thing. Everything was changing spiritual. There was a lot of things coming together.
Are there a
Ronald
lot
Reagan
of
was a part of it.
Christians there at that time? Were there?
No, they've been starved.
Underneath.
They were starved under communism. They couldn't have churches and
Sure,
stuff like
yeah.
that. They could, but it was really restricted, very hard to preach.
And he came over and
And he came over there from an invitation, because I think it was Hungary was trying to get into trying to get a trade agreement with the United States.
Right.
And to have that, they had to have freedom of religion.
Okay.
So they want to show, we got freedom of religion. Get Billy Graham to come over here.
Yeah.
I think it was Hungary. I can't quite remember my facts on
Yeah.
it, but it was some country in Western and Eastern Europe,
Eastern Europe,
that
yeah.
wanted to have my granddaddy there, really as a show. Hey, we do believe we want
freedom
this
of
trade
religion.
agreement.
Oh, okay.
And
So it's political.
It was a political move, but my granddaddy seized it as an opportunity to preach the
Yeah.
gospel, because they didn't think no one's going to come. No one knows who Billy Graham is, and lo and behold, it was packed.
Was it?
Yeah, I mean, it was packed. People hanging off everywhere. And it was the first of the communist countries, I think,
And
Hungary.
he gave an invitation?
Well, he would preach. There was no room for an invitation.
Right.
Well, I say,
Right.
when we think of invitation, we
Right.
say,
Think
come
of
forward.
forward, yeah.
You couldn't. There was no. People
Right.
had their tape recorders.
But he told them how to
doing
get
tape cassettes
saved,
and hitting
obviously.
record, listening to it, and because they had, and the communists didn't know what to do with it. They're like, this is
We've never seen this
and they
before,
were getting
right?
afraid, like because they never seen anything like this. They didn't think anyone was going to show up, and so they were cutting the power cords to his microphone and stuff like that.
They were?
And somebody was,
Yeah.
and taking or not showing up with speakers,
Sure.
and because it's a lot of work. Matter of fact, where we're eating this meal right now is in my granddad's office. All those details were done in this office, especially a man named John Akers and T.W. Wilson. They worked hard on trying to organize this, taking trips to Eastern Europe for months ahead of time, trying to organize this, talking, dialoguing, planning details, who they're going to meet, what things they're going to see. It was all planned out, and they didn't know from day to day if they were going to be able to finish it because it was such new territory. No one knew what was going to happen.
And
But God used it to open up Eastern Europe. So I believe a lot of it had to do with
the
there's
ripple
a lot
effect,
of things.
dominoes.
But Billy Graham's got to be in that phrase somewhere because it was
Yeah.
a spiritual change that was going on in Eastern Europe.
You know, I was in Bulgaria just like a year and a half ago, performing at this church, and underneath, I was stomping my foot and something keeping time, and it was hollow underneath. And I asked in between through the translator, what's underneath this stage or this, floor? And he said, it's a baptistry.
Yeah.
He said, because in the days of communism, we had to baptize at the dark of night underground.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, like what you're talking about, so the spiritual activity was still there. You can't squelch
That's right.
the Spirit of God. And so Billy's visit there must have been a liberating, these people are starving.
Yeah.
And someone's bringing food.
It was just like, I've seen it where, I go up to Alaska a lot, and they got this tundra up there, and they'll have these tundra fires that will start through lightning or an accident or something like that, and it'll burn and just smolder for months. It will smolder. Then all of a sudden it gets a little bit of oxygen and it comes out, and that's what my granddad was. It was smoldering underneath, but when my granddaddy came, it's just like oxygen to a fire. And then it kept opening up to other countries. Romania is probably one of the most unbelievable. I was just there last year in Romania, but to see the people, they're hanging off roofs. It's every OSHA rule would have been broken. And people crammed in to the point where it got scary. They felt like they didn't feel unsafe. It was just, there was such a crowd of people that they were just getting pushed and pushed and pushed.
Sure.
And people were excited to hear the gospel. And that's what God gives favor, and God was bringing people to hear the gospel, and my granddaddy was the megaphone for God to preach.
Great. Now, when you go to Romania now, are they still showing up?
Yeah. Oh, yes. We just had a huge one.
You're the
I'm the
evangelist?
preacher. I was doing a crusade.
Who's your George Beverly Shea?
Well, I got Mark Christian that goes with me quite a few times.
I know him. One of the greatest singers in the world.
Yeah, but sang for Dr. Falwell for years and for the Sounds of Liberty.
I watched him grow up.
Were you looking?
Huh?
Were you looking?
No, Lord. I could be your George. We are in Billy and Ruth Graham's home, which has been a wonderful day. And sitting over to my right is a friend of mine from college who just happens to now be Will Graham's George Beverly Shea. In other words, as George was for Billy, my friend Mark Christian, who's singing the Sounds of Liberty, one of my dear friends and one of the best singers. And we're going to sing the Billy Graham Crusade invitation song. And if you know it, sing along with us. Just as I am, without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come, I come. Just as I am, thou wilt receive.
promise. I believe, O Lamb of God, I come, I come. Just as I am, I come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come, I come.
Yeah, and David was telling us, and actually Mark too, like how your demeanor, your physical presence, your speech is the most like Billy out of, especially like maybe when he was your age, out of all the grandchildren and stuff. Do you feel that as a mantle of responsibility, or do you still feel the freedom to be you while in this lineage, you know?
No, I'm blessed to have wonderful grandparents, you know, and that's always going to be a part of me. But I got to be my own person, and I got to follow the Lord. I got to be obedient to Him, not what my dad wants, or my granddad wants, or my grandmother, or my mom. I got to do what God's called me to do.
It may seem oversimple, but if you had to, Will Graham, if you had to sum it all up, your life's purpose, life's meaning.
And to preach the gospel, plain and simple.
I do another program called Mondays with Mark.
Okay.
This is more of a fun. This show, Dinner Conversations. We go.
This is a drag.
We go. No, it's not. No, it's not. So we're handling issues with artists who are dealing with those issues, or people, writers. So but this is the most light-hearted dinner conversations we've had. But when
You haven't gotten into our issues.
well, maybe we could.
Hey, Will, come sing. Over there in that chair. You're waiting on him?
No, I was going to see if he needs a way out.
Oh, he needs a way out. I love you,
Who, me?
And we'll be in Franklin, Tennessee this weekend.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, wasn't that a fun episode with Will Graham and his Aunt Gigi?
That's right, Aunt Gigi. You can
love her.
find Will Graham's devotional redeemed through our Amazon affiliate link in our episode description.
And if you want to binge watch all of season 2 of Dinner Conversations, you can do that right now on Amazon Prime.
Thanks for watching Dinner Conversations with
Mark Lowry,
and Andrew Greer.
turning the light on.
One question at a time.
Yep. Dinner Conversations is brought to you by Food for the Hungry, a relief and development organization serving those in need around the globe for more than 40 years.
Help our friends at Food for the Hungry save thousands of refugee lives today by considering a generous gift.
A gift that will be matched 22 times.
It's incredible. Visit fh.org/dinner to give now.